Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kai and this channel is all about personal finance, investing, and overall well-being. So in today's episode, I wanted to talk to you guys about how I was able to purchase my first property as a 23-year-old real estate agent in the state of Georgia. It was not easy, so let's get into it. I wanted to spend more time talking about the actual home buying process than how I became a real estate agent, but if you're interested in knowing how I became an agent at the age of 23 in under 2 months, leave a comment below and I will be sure to post that video for you guys. Before I get into the actual steps on how to purchase a property in 2022, I want to get into a little bit of the backstory of how I came about purchasing my property, the kind of ups and downs that I went through before getting my home. So I started back in September 2021. I decided that I wanted to buy my first property. You know, I was saving up quite a bit from my job and I had some savings already from previous business ventures and I was ready to buy a house, but I just knew that I qualified. I didn't know anything beyond the fact that I qualified for a home. So I called up a bank and I said, hey, I want to buy a home, and within a few minutes I was approved for a $300,000 loan. Now, what they don't tell you is that just because you're pre-approved for a loan does not mean you can buy a $300,000 house. They have not dug into all of your financials. They have not gone to the underwriters to confirm that yes, you can in fact afford this home. So that being said, I took that pre-approval letter and I found the first house on market that looked great to me in my area. I called up the realtor and he was like, oh, well, that home's been sold, but I have a few others that you might be interested in. So I'm like, why did you even call me? Anyway, I said, sure. I met with that realtor that weekend. I saw 3 homes and the first home that we saw was beautiful and I wanted it right away. It was about $260,000. It was 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, very beautiful home in the middle of the city. So if you're familiar with Atlanta, you know that this was pretty much a steal, and it had a light flip on it, nothing too major, but everything pretty much looked great to me. I said, let's get it under contract. My realtor was so happy to get that done, and within a week we were under contract. So the next thing I had to do was get an inspection. I got the inspection. Everything pretty much checked out, a few minor things here and there, but I was able to go back to the seller and have the seller pretty much fix those issues in order for me to get the home. So fast forward 2 weeks later, I'm going through with all of the financial documents with my lender, and basically I find out that I actually wasn't approved for that much money, and that was okay because the home was only $250,000, I forgot what I said. It wasn't $300,000 essentially. So I didn't know what this meant. I was very confused. I was pretty much like, why would you tell me that I was approved for this much when you know in fact that I wasn't? And the reason why I was so concerned was because even though the house was a lot less than what I got pre-approved for, I didn't qualify for that loan program that the bank was offering. Basically a 0% down loan that only special banks offer. And so they said, okay, you can't qualify for the 0%, but you do qualify for the 3%. And I was like, okay, we'll make that work. However, towards the end of the funding stage, they come back to me and they told me that in order to make this loan work, we actually have to make it an FHA loan versus a conventional. And I was not happy with that because that is not what I signed up for and that is not what I thought I was going to get. And the reason why they came back and told me this was because I essentially had a business, and last year I filed for a loss, as I'm sure a lot of people did. And essentially when you have a business, they take your previous 2 tax returns instead of just the last one. They average it out and they add it into your DTI, which can have a negative impact if you filed for a loss. I decided to pull out because I did not go under contract with the intentions of having an FHA loan or having to pay a lot more in my monthly payment because ultimately this home was going to be an investment property. So enough of that. It was a loss and it was very overwhelming at the time, but I basically sat down and wrote down 2 scenarios. So the first scenario was to continue staying in my current position where I'm at, where I was living, not purchasing a home, continue to save, and basically study to become an agent so that way I can have a commission once I go to purchase my property. And the reason why I decided to do that was because I looked into so many different ways on how you can save when purchasing a home. and getting what you want out of the house. And one of the many things that kept coming up was to sell yourself the house. So I thought that was a pretty viable thing for me to do, given that I found an online course and I can do it at my own pace. And once I do something, I'm pretty dedicated, so I knew that wouldn't have been an issue. Scenario number 2 would be to go move forward with that property that I had under contract at the time and basically take an L for several years on the monthly mortgage payment, which would have been way too much for what I was trying to do, and potentially rent out the rooms upon moving in, which is not what I wanted to do at all. So I decided to go with scenario number 1, and I got my real estate license and I tried the process over again. So now I'm gonna get into the step-by-step process of what it took for me to purchase my first property. You decide to purchase a property, the first thing you have to do is sit down with yourself and figure out how much can you actually afford. And you won't really know this real number until you get to the end of the funding process, but you still want to get a realistic idea of how much you want to spend on your property. So what I like to say is, depending on how much house you want to get, so let's say you're like, I can afford a $300,000 house. So you always want to take at least 6% of that $300,000 or whatever that number is, and know that that's going to go towards your closing costs and your down payment. 3% typically goes towards closing and 3% goes towards down payment. And if you're lucky enough to participate in any of these special programs that banks offer, I'll leave a few linked down below. But for example, I know Regions offers a really great 0% down program for those who qualify. They also have a really good 3% only down payment program, closing costs covered. And if you're interested in something like that, I highly recommend looking into it and making sure that you qualify. So step 1 is to essentially figure out what you want your budget to be. And the best way to do this is to reverse engineer it by starting with the number that you want to come out of your bank account on a monthly basis. And whatever that number looks like, you can kind of work your way up to figure out how much house you can actually afford. There are some really great tools online like Zillow's payment calculator. I love to use that. I'll link it down below. Basically, you can put in your desired down payment, and from there it'll calculate other things such as PMI, property taxes, and those sort of things. Be sure to select a specific property to get the best idea. The way I like to do this is to go into a city that I'm looking to purchase in and select a home that I think is within my price range and kind of play around with those numbers down below. Once you figured out what your budget is, the next step is to make a list of must-haves, and I try to do this with all my clients or potential clients. I even did it with myself, and I was amazed at how accurate it was going into my home buying process. I was amazed to find how closely I was able to stick to that list when purchasing my home. I actually was able to get everything on my list but the basement, but instead of a basement I got a garage, so that's pretty cool. And so I highly recommend that you make that list of must-haves, and here's an example of mine right here so you can kind of get an idea of what it is that you should be making a list of. The reason for this list is so that you can stick as close to it as possible when going to purchase a home, because the last thing you want to do is buy a house that you didn't even want in the first place. Next is the fun part. This is where you start getting on Zillow, Realtor.com, or if you're already working with a realtor, then this is a great way to get your must-haves to them and have them start searching for properties for you. And if you don't have an agent, this would be the part where you would start looking for one that matches your needs, or someone that can kind of understand where you are looking to purchase and what you're looking to buy. And if you're in the state of Georgia or Florida, be sure to contact me and I'd love to help you out with this process. Next step is to actually go and view the property. And if you have more than property that you're viewing, I encourage you to view whatever property that you decide to put under contract more than once, because essentially it can kind of get lost in translation. Once you view 10 properties and you decide to just close on the, property number 8, you can kind of forget what that property value was, and when deciding, if you don't go back and view it again. Next is to submit your offer. This can be such a nerve-wracking piece of the process, but I promise you it goes by so fast, and you'll realize very shortly after that that was the easiest part of the process. Submitting your offer has to be done pretty much as soon as you decide that you want to purchase the property, just because of how fast properties are going off the market. I had to submit several offers before I finally got an offer where I wasn't up against 30 different hedge funds. And the reason why I was able to do that was because I was able to view a property that was not on the multiple listing service yet. And when I say that, I mean it wasn't on Zillow, it wasn't on Realtor.com when I found it, because I was able to look at my multiple listing service as an agent and see properties that were about to be listed. Submitting your offer essentially looks like you talking with your agent and coming to a number that makes sense for you to put in an offer on this property. You don't want to go too much over asking price because this can be really bad when it comes to getting an appraisal on the property. The property may not appraise for that high, so you want to make sure that you can submit an offer that can eventually get appraised. Your agent will prepare a contract, send it over to you with the offer number, and send it over to the other agent involved in the transaction. The other agent will have their client, which would be the seller, review the offer and decide whether or not they want to go with you. Once they've accepted your offer, then you are on to the next step, which is to get your inspection done. Do not submit an offer unless you have some sort of inspection period, because this is so important in determining whether or not you even want to move forward with this property. Yes, it does cost anywhere from $300 to $500 or even more depending on the size of the property. This is the most important piece of the process, because if anything is missed in the inspection, it can come back much later on once you've already been living in the house, or maybe sometimes even as soon as you've moved in. And I have a story about that, so I will post that in a later video. I'm gonna post a video on what exactly to look for when doing an inspection for your house. You will not be doing the inspection yourself. However, you want to know what questions to ask an inspector the day of your inspection, because sometimes these people, they may not give you everything that's wrong with the house, or they may give you so much that you don't know whether or not it's important to move forward with the purchase of the property. So getting an inspection is always recommended 100% of the time. If you decide not to get an inspection on the property, you're essentially buying the property sold as is, and you cannot have a say in what comes about even after you've moved into the property, regardless of if the seller disclosed it or not. So you want to get an inspection done. And again, this is the most important part of the process because it basically determines everything that comes after. After you've gotten the inspection and everything came back looking great, or you've had some changes that you want to request from the seller, the next step is to order an appraisal. The appraisal is essentially the bank's way of saying, okay, we can actually give you a loan for this house because it fits our criteria for loaning people money. The appraisal is where you pay the bank, and you'll most likely get this credited back to you at closing, but essentially you pay about anywhere from $500 to $600, depending on the size of the home, to have a third-party company hired by the bank to come out and make sure that the house is actually worth what you are buying it for or what they are loaning you. This is the part that you do have to do yourself, so make sure to order the appraisal as soon as you get the inspection done and have gotten confirmation from the seller that they are willing to fix all of the issues that have come out of the inspection before moving forward. After the appraisal comes back and your bank says, okay, it appraised that value, then you can go ahead and start finalizing your financial documents with the bank. So these are your taxes, these are your pay stubs, these are your bank statements. Anything that the bank is asking you for, it's going to be quite a bit, so don't get overwhelmed and just understand that this is a part of their process, their underwriting process. So they want to make sure that when they loan you this money that they can get paid back in the future, essentially. So be sure to provide them all of those documents in a timely manner, because it's very crucial to the timing of your for your contract, because you will most likely have a financial contingency, which is about 21 days. And lastly, the most nerve-wracking part is actually waiting to get to closing. Anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks between your appraisal and getting approval for the loan and actually closing. And in that time period, you just kind of want to think about all the things. Well, first of all, you kind of want to take a deep breath and congratulate yourself for making it this far. It is a huge deal. And then after you do that, you kind of want to start thinking about things like, how much is it going to cost to furnish this home? Do I want to essentially buy secondhand furniture? Do I want to buy all brand new furniture? Whatever you want to do, that's up to you. But I would recommend to start looking into items and budgeting yourself, because the budgeting doesn't stop with the actual value of the home. The budgeting continues all the way into you moving into the home. And lastly, we are ready to close. Now, it may have been 30 days, it may have been 45 days, whatever the process was, you should be happy that you were able to make it through that process, because not everyone is fortunate enough to get there, and a lot of people do stress out along the way. It's not as exciting as it might sound, just because you're signing a bunch of documents from the bank basically saying, if you don't pay your mortgage, we're going to come and take your home, and it's a lot of documents. So you'll be signing for quite some time. I think I timed it. I was signing for about 15 minutes, not even exaggerating. That's closing. Once you've signed your last document and you've paid your closing cash, you are now the owner of your property. So congratulations. So that was an overview of what the process was like for me to purchase my home. I went through those exact steps that I mentioned, and in later videos I plan on breaking each step down in more detail so that way you have more tools and more guidance on how to tackle each step of the process. I hope this video was really helpful. If there is something that I missed, please be sure to comment down below. I am open to learning as much about this process. Even though I am an agent, I still have a lot to learn. So be sure to let me know if I missed anything, and I hope this video was helpful. Thanks.